We tend to think of economics as this world of charts, data, and dense policy papers, right? But what if I told you the most powerful economic forces aren't numbers at all, but stories? What if ideas actually spread just like viruses, infecting our decisions, shaping entire markets, and defining whole generations? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into, the hidden science of these narrative epidemics.
Okay, so what could Betty Boop, Joan of Arc, and the housing market possibly have in common? It sounds like the start of a really weird joke, doesn't it? But seriously, there is a fascinating hidden thread that connects all of them, and the answer reveals everything about how ideas catch on and literally change our world.
And that brings us to this core idea, the narrative epidemic. Think about it. Just like a virus, a story has a contagion rate, how fast it spreads, and a recovery rate, how quickly we forget about it or move on. Some stories, they just flare up and then they're gone. But others become chronic. They can last for centuries, shaping how we think, how we spend, and how we invest our money. So, first up, let's talk about pace. Because not all of these narrative epidemics move at the same speed. Not at all. Some can peak in a week, kind of like an internet meme, while others can take a century or even longer to really reach their full influence. Okay, check out the song Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. It wasn't just a hit once, it had multiple waves of contagion. It had an initial outbreak, it faded away, and then bam, it became contagious all over again as new artists basically acted as new carriers. This shows you how a really powerful narrative can just lie dormant and then reemerge decades later as strong as ever. But here's a really interesting twist. For a story to be powerful, does it need to be talked about constantly? Well, not necessarily. Picture this. It's 1932, the absolute bottom of the Great Depression. A journalist named Arthur Kroc travels 10,000 miles across America. He's expecting to hear nonstop panic talk about the economy. But instead, what he heard was mostly just boring, ordinary chatter. And this is what's so important. Kroc heard this one single image from a taxi driver. And that story, even though it was mentioned so rarely, was incredibly infectious. Think about it. You only need to hear a story like that once for it to totally change your economic outlook. It creates fear, it makes you save more, and it changes behavior on a massive scale, even if it's only a tiny, tiny fraction of our daily conversation. So we know narratives spread at different speeds, but they also don't exist in a vacuum. They tend to group together into what we can call narrative constellations, and they evolve over time. Let's take a look at how that works. This right here is a perfect example of a narrative constellation. Just look at these two massive asset bubbles, almost 200 years apart. Back in the 1830s, the stories were all about the romance of owning a delightful farm. Fast forward to the 2000s, and it's all about flipping houses and using the internet to spy on your neighbor's Zillow estimate. See? The underlying theme, get rich with property, it's the same, but the cluster of stories around it is totally tailored to its time. And just like real viruses, narratives mutate. Take the phrase, beggar my neighbor. It started out as a simple card game, but then during the Great Depression, economists grabbed it to describe trade wars. And then it mutated just a little bit to beggar thy neighbor. That one word change, thy, made it sound all archaic, almost biblical, and super profound. It gave a modern policy debate the weight of ancient wisdom. Crazy, right? All right, now let's get into something that's, well, it's pretty provocative. You might assume that for a story to spread far and wide, it has to be true. But the evidence shows that a story's truthfulness has almost nothing to do with how contagious it is. This question, it feels like it could have been posted on Twitter yesterday, right? But it was actually written by a Greek author way back in the 2nd century AD. He was wrestling with the very same thing we are today, our weird magnetic attraction to a good story, regardless of the facts. Honestly, I think we should bring this word back, a Philipseutis. It's not just someone who's gullible. It's someone who actually enjoys and shares sensational stories because they're dramatic and entertaining. It points to this really deep human tendency to prefer a thrilling narrative over a boring truth. And just look at how this old concept can trigger a brand new, explosive epidemic. The term fake news just went vertical after 2016, but the idea itself is ancient. Back in the 1890s, they called it yellow journalism, using sensational, often totally untrue stories to whip up public emotion and even start wars. It's the same virus, just with a new name. Okay, so we've seen how these stories work. For our final section, let's get practical. What are the core mechanics that make any narrative, economic or otherwise, truly contagious? What's in the toolkit for a viral idea? So when you really break down the most contagious narratives out there, they almost always combine three key things: a human hook that we can all connect with, a powerful visual that just sticks in our minds, and simple repetition to keep it right there at the top of our minds. This framework really explains so much. Take the Laffer curve. It's a simple economic idea, sure, but it was the story that made it famous. The human hook? You've got famous politicians at dinner. The strong visual? An idea so simple you can just sketch it out on a napkin. And the repetition? Once that story got published in a book, it was told and retold in every Econ 101 class, and it just became a legend.
Or look at a modern example. The human hook here is so powerful. A young David versus the Goliath of global indifference. The visual is absolutely unforgettable. A tiny sailboat crossing a massive ocean. And the repetition was built right in, with news outlets tracking her journey every single day, turning her into a super spreader for a whole constellation of narratives about climate change.
And this brings it all back to you. The stories you're hearing every day about inflation, the housing market, the next big tech boom or bust, they aren't just background noise. They are active epidemics, and they're all competing for your attention and shaping your financial decisions. So the real question isn't just if you can spot them, but which ones have already infected you.